Hey everyone, this is for February 9th, 2020, number 2 in our 4-week series on reading the Bible. So sometimes we can just read the Bible and it can be intimidating, or if we're honest, sometimes boring. We just don't have time for it and all this stuff. But it really comes down to not understanding how to read it and put everything in context and all that stuff. And so this series is really exploring how we can get the most out of our Bible reading and then apply it in relevant ways. So for this second installment, it's titled Meet the Author. And let's just go into the sermon curriculum for this second message. The Share Your Story here is all about exploring our intentions. So we're talking about the original author's intention, the author who wrote each book of the Bible. What were they intended to communicate in certain passages and books and all that. So the Share Your Story section is really to get them kind of thinking of their intentions behind their words. The first is, why do you care that people know your intent behind your words? And so we can say that, right? That's an easy answer that everyone will kind of have, like, oh yeah, people need to understand my intentions. And number two, do you care equally about finding out the intent behind other people's words? Not really, right? Not often. That's a discipline to cultivate. It reminds me of, if you're in a relationship, if you've ever been in a relationship, you've probably heard at least once, it's not about what you said, it's how you said it, right? And so it's kind of the same thing about, it's discovering that intent of the author that we can find out in each biblical passage and throughout the Bible. The Hear God's Story section, the first question there is training our people to see, to ask themselves, who is the author here? And who's the intended audience? First thing we got to ask, who in the world is writing this? And who are they trying to communicate to? And so it's a simple question. I'm going to read a passage there as an example we're using, Philippians 3:13-14. It's kind of an awkward passage just by itself for a reason, but we don't want to get into that with the first question here, just author and audience. Number two, this is a quick question. Are you able to find out the meaning behind Philippians 3:13-14 by reading this passage alone, or do you have to take other verses around it into consideration? For most, it'll be pretty obvious that it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And so, yeah, you got to take other things into context, which brings us to number three. Just did a few sentences there on the context of number two. The context of this verse, which really kind of opens the whole thing up. And the question there is, how does this help us discover Paul's intent here better? How does context help us apply this teaching more in line with the author's intent? And so we've talked about the author's intent. Now we're going to explore why this makes a difference. It makes a huge difference, right? When you can walk through these questions. So hopefully this will whet the appetite of people in the groups by saying, oh my gosh, I need to keep this at the forefront of all my Bible reading because this makes a huge difference. To create a new story, there's just one question here. What methods will you use this week in your Bible reading to guard against our tendency to read what we want it to say and instead find out what it actually says? If you're human, this is something we fall into a lot. We'll open the Bible really quickly and say, okay, what does this mean to me? Oh yeah, that's what it means, and then you close it. And then you imagine the original author, beside you, like, as a ghost, like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? You're taking it all out of context, right? But not really. That's an awkward analogy. But you can kind of see my intent behind what I just said. The going deeper number on the back, or scroll down. I took a snippet from one of my favorite books on this whole topic of reading the Bible well by a guy named Walt Russell. He's a retired professor at Talbot School of Theology, Biola. And he taught and wrote on this stuff a lot. He was well respected, great heart too, a couple of great minds. So a snippet of this, of his book there, Playing with Fire. The last sentence of that snippet, being spiritually formed according to the meaning of the biblical passage, is kind of vital. There can be no true spiritual transformation apart from the true meaning of the biblical text. 3 questions there. How and why can we often miss the point Russell is making here? I wish I could be in all your groups and hear what people say, but I wrote that question, then I was thinking, like, how would I answer that? There's we want the Bible to say what we want it to. often. We want to justify ourselves. We're sometimes too lazy to do take just a few minutes of study. There's a lot of reasons that we miss this point. Number two, considering this, what's the danger of just interpreting the Bible as what it means to me? This is so common. A lot of people with great intentions and great hearts ask this question just because they're ignorant of how to actually read the Bible and the benefit of that and the vitalness of context. So it's okay to ask, what does it mean to me? Only after we've asked, what's it actually saying for itself? So we say, what's this actually saying? And then after we've done all the homework in the context, we can say, okay, how does this speak into my life and how do I apply it? Number three, how does this lesson distinguish between the questions, how can I use this passage to be personally fulfilled? And what hard choices do I need to make to follow Jesus better in light of this teaching? How does it distinguish between those two questions? It's a difference between making the goal ourselves and making the goal Christ, right? Or making God into our image and allowing ourselves to be conformed into his image. And so this third question, the idea behind it was to really confront people's deeper motivations. Why are you reading the Bible? And then if we're pursuing God and trying to transform into his image and what it actually says, then more often than not, we're going to be confronted with things we have to change. We're going to be confronted with things that of misplaced priorities, or things that we have to die to ourselves to, or things we have to give up, things like this. The Bible's annoying like that. But the best thing is that after we've done that, the transformation is to look more like Christ, to model his heart, and then eventually be greater lights in whatever God has us doing in this season of our lives. And then there's the same stuff from last week, reading for further study, about reading plans and online resources, commentaries, and all that. If you need any other resources or questions about any of this stuff, feel free to email me like usual. But yeah, enjoy this lesson.